Ready to hear what I read in March and April? Yes, it seems to be a pattern that I'm doing this year. I did my video for January and February, now March and April. It's definitely not happening for May and June because I've got some exciting readathon announcements that I'm going to share. But first, let's get to the reads that I read the last 2 months. Welcome to Pen to Paper. I'm Leah. It has been a while since I've been on here, but I'm back and I'm going to share my March reads and my April reads. I am going to next week put out a single video review of one of the reads that I read in April. I'm super excited to share that with you guys, but for now, let's get into what I read. And after I cover the reviews for the books, I'm going to get into my May reading plans. Yes, it is the middle of May. I've done a good job so far with my May reading plans, but I'm excited to kind of share a little bit with you guys. So the first book that I read in March was Siege and Storm by Leigh Bardugo. I did have another book in between that book and Ruin and Rising, which is the last book in the series, but I'm just going to talk about book 2 and book 3, together. Now, I was really, really excited for Shadow and Bone Season 2 to come out, and I thought Season 2 is based on book 2, just like Season 1 was completely based on book 1. Well, I get to the halfway point of Season 2, and guess what? That wasn't it at all. It's actually book 2 and book 3. So I was thrown for a little loop, and I was a little frustrated by that, but I was able to read both and then move on with the show. So let's talk about Siege and Storm. Siege and Storm picks up where Shadow and Bone left off, where she is now a definitive enemy of the Darkling. Alina, who is she controls light, the Darkling controls the dark, and there's this face-off in the Shadowfold. He is left there to die, but he, of course, doesn't die. He is the main bad character, so of course he needs to be around for book 2 and book 3. And book 2 picks off where they are looking for the sea serpent because it's magical, and Alina needs the magic of the sea serpent to help amplify her power so she could be just as powerful as the Darkling. She has the antlers from the white stag, and now she's looking to find the sea serpent. She meets this new character called Sturmhond. He's a privateer, and she is on his ship because the Darkling has captured her, and they are on the ship, and they find the serpent, and she kills the serpent. She escapes from the Darkling by Sturmhond's help, which we find out that Sturmhond is actually the bastard prince of Ravka, who is trying to unite the country against this evil and to unite them under one banner. So the first army, which are regular people, and then the second army, which are those with powers, the Grisha. And what follows is just this hunt. So they found the serpent and kind of her new place. What is Alina's new place in all of this? Well, she is now a saint because of the Apparat, who was the religious right hand of the king, named her a saint. She has this huge following, and she goes back to the capital in Ravka to help rebuild the army, whatever is left of it. And the Darkling, though, has taken a bunch of Grisha with him and is training them to move against the bastard prince, and there is this showdown in the end. I really enjoyed book 2. There was a lot going on. It moved at a good pace. I think there was just a small point in the book where it lagged a little too much, but then it picked up again really quickly. It was between the second and third, and like between 2/3 and the end of the book, but it didn't last long, so that was good. Then we come to Ruin and Rising, which now they're looking for the last amplifier, which is the Phoenix. And on their way to finding the Phoenix, they discover something, this secret that completely changes the ball game and changes how they're planning to defeat the Darkling. I'm not going to say what it is. I'm not going to say much more than that, other than the secret was good. It was a good reveal, but I felt the end, the way that she faces off against the Darkling and just kind of all how the secret plays into it, it just seemed a little flat. It seemed cheap. It seemed like a cop-out. Like, the writing wasn't very incredibly, like, it just, it missed a lot. It felt really lacking. I like how she interacts with the Darkling at the end. And I'm not going to say what happens, but that was kind of the only thing I liked about the ending. So I was just disappointed. And even the ending where it tells you what happens to all the characters, I'm just like, that's it? I don't know. So that's one thing I did prefer. Now, when I was watching season 2 on the show, I preferred season 1. They did a better job with it. I think they jam-packed too much. So really, season 2 should have been, book 2, and season 3 should be book 3. That's my opinion. But I do like how the show ended a whole lot better than the book. Let's just say that. Okay, so enough of Grishaverse. Now we're going to talk about Book Lovers by Emily Henry. I love this book so much. I give this 5 stars. I don't usually go for contemporary romance. I find they all kind of feel the same after a while, and I don't know, it's drama. And drama is so frustrating sometimes, but this I loved. It was about, she's a literary agent who has this meeting with an editor, and they just kind of hate each other and things don't work out. 3 years fast forward to the future, her sister, this literary agent's sister, says, let's go to, I don't know, something like Smith Falls, some generic Hallmarkish type of little town, and you need to get out and just kind of like live the whole Hallmark experience. Well, guess who she sees at this little town is this editor that they just butted heads the first time they met. And what develops is this understanding between them. He needs her, she needs him for a project that they're working on. And as that unfolds, you see tension still throughout, but also an understanding between the two characters and just how that romance plays out. I just loved it because it has to do with books. Like, if you're a book lover and you love romance, this is one for you. Really, really well done. Then I read The Disinivited Guest by Carol Goodman. I have no books to show for all this, by the way. These were all library books. I was really disappointed by this one. I think I gave it 3 stars. I was expecting it to be very creepy and haunting. It's about, now guess what? It's another COVID coronavirus pandemic. Okay, I don't think it said coronavirus, but basically we just went through a pandemic, right? Well, it's another pandemic in the future, and they kind of refer to the first pandemic and how people survived that. Well, these 6 to 8 friends go to this island that is owned by one of the friends or their family, and they go to this island to kind of stave off the pandemic, but do it together. And this island has this dark history to do with people who came over a century or two ago in sick ships, and they just kind of left these people here to die and to be sick on this island, and then there's talk of witches, and there's some creepy places on the island. What bothered me about the book is I didn't care about any of the characters. They weren't that believable. Even the aura of the island, I felt really could have used more creepiness to it with the writing, like how she explored the settings of the island. The characterization was so flat. I don't know. I don't even know why I gave it 3 stars now that I'm thinking about it. Maybe I should have given it 2. And it was a staff pick at the library, I think, but it didn't do it for me. No. So you can try it. Maybe it might do it for you, but it's not one that I would suggest to read. Then I read The Things We Cannot Say by Kelly Rimmer. That one I read for my local book club. It's historical fiction, World War II. And I'm a little hesitant to read those because they feel so hyped up for no reason. But I really, really loved this book. I even cried at the end. It's about this young girl who's in Poland, and the Nazis come and occupy Poland. And she has this young man who she's in love with who went to, I believe it was Warsaw, to study to become a doctor, but she finds out that all the doctors are being killed off. And so there's not much hope that he's alive. And it details her and her family living through the occupation, what they kind of did to survive and to actually store up for themselves, despite the Nazis taking a quota or a share of what the farmers were producing. And her man comes back a couple years later. He's alive, and he hides out in the woods, and then they bring them into their home where the cellar is, where they're hiding all the extra food, and they're together. He has done something unspeakable back in Warsaw that he has a hard time speaking of, but he eventually does to her. And because of that, he's trying to redeem himself by helping these Jews in the area to survive, to leave Poland. And there's this family that he's been feeding, because the mother just had a baby. And so her family decides to help him. But in all that, there's a cost to be paid, and he has to be left behind. And they've received papers to get out of Poland, which only because they're smuggling film that will show the rest of the world what it's been like for the Polish people under occupation. It's an amazing story of perseverance, of love, not even just romantic love, but love for family, love for people you don't even know, love for romance. But it wasn't too heavy on that. And just the strength of character that these characters had to go through and grow very quickly in a short amount of time, and the horrors of the Nazi occupation in Poland. It was incredible. And on top of this, there's a dual timeline where we're in the present, and this mother has a son who is somewhere on the spectrum. And her life dealing with that and how that affects her and her husband's life. And we find out that her grandmother, who's in the hospital, who's dying, that's the young woman from Poland that we read about. So you're seeing both of their timelines. And she actually goes to Poland to look for answers for her grandmother. And there's just this beautiful culmination at the end of how those two timelines meet together. Brought tears to my eyes. I will hype this one up. It is an amazing story. The Things We Cannot Say by Kelly Rimmer. Then I read Control by Melissa Cassera. This one I found off Instagram. It is a YA, dark, fantasy, romance, teen angst novel. I loved the cover, and it kind of had all the points of a book that I enjoy, so I read it. I breezed through it very quickly. There's a lot of... The story has a lot of... what's the word I'm looking for? It has a lot of potential to be something really good, like something really interesting. And at times that potential peaked out, but it was so ridden by teen angst. Like I was able to... as I said, I breezed through it really quickly. the teen angst is fun for a little bit, but then it gets like overly dramatic, and then you're just kind of like, okay, let's get to the meat of the story. Why does she have powers, or why does he have powers, or why are things working out this way and that? And then there's constantly like, oh, they're here and then they're there, and it's like, how do these teens get around so much when they're stuck on this school that they're actually not even allowed to leave? So it had some issues. But if you like teen angst, this is definitely a book for you. I'm still going to read the second book and the third book, just because now I need to kind of know the ending of the story. Like, what is the big deal with all these powers? And well, I guess you kind of want to know if the two main ones are going to get together. But the girl seems to be flip-flopping from guy to guy, and it just, you know, it's a little frustrating to read. The last one I'm going to talk about, now there's actually two more, but before I get to the last one, this is actually the last one I read in April. Alexandria Fire, Danny and Danny, a novel by Emily Murray. She's a local author. I'm excited to do the single video review for this next week. But now, second official last one that I read was The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. Now this one I heard so much about in the BookTube community. When was it? 2 years ago? And I heard a lot about it, and I guess I just never intentionally went to go get it out. But I was at my library, and then I see it sitting there, and I was like, okay, well, that's meant to be. I'm going to pick it up and read it. I didn't know that this book was either you love it or you hate it until I started reading reviews after I read it. Okay. Getting into it was easy because it just takes you and goes with the story right away. It's about these four native Blackfoot men who committed something 10 years ago that they shouldn't have committed, out of desperation, out of just wanting to do what they wanted to do when they shouldn't have. And now this spirit is coming back to haunt them and destroy their lives in ways they would never have imagined. And it kind of goes from each man who took part in the unspeakable act that they did, and how that affects the relationships with their families and their wives and their kids. And also their native identity and how they're finding their place in the world, but also just dealing with the guilt and the knowing of what they did, and now it's coming back to haunt them. So the story was really interesting, but what caught me off guard was Stephen Graham Jones's writing style. It was really different, not what I was expecting, and it wasn't very natural for me. So because of that, I really had to force myself sometimes to read the book. But I'm glad I did, because at a certain point, now a few people said you have to really slow down your reading and like completely ingest all the commas, and because it's not a normal type of voice that he writes in. It's very, very unique. But I didn't. I kind of read at the usual pace I read, but I'm glad I stuck with it, because at a certain point you do get used to it. So you either slow down and get used to it sooner, rather than go through a lot of it and then get used to it later. That's my tip for you. But at the end, once I kind of hit that bump in the road, like, okay, now I'm really enjoying this, the ending was something. There's quite a lot of body horror in this book, and it's gory, but not in a cheap slasher way. It's a very well thought out, insightful story, thriller slasher. So if you enjoy that story, and kind of ready yourself for the fact that the voice is very different and the writing style is very different, then this is it's a really great story. It was a very strong story, let's just say that. Strong in every aspect. So you can prepare yourself for that. That's what I read for March and April. Really enjoyed my reads. Okay, now I'm not going to go into all the reads that I'm reading in May, because there's a lot of them. I'm reading, or at least aiming to read, 11 books. Because I'm taking place in the May the Force Be With You readathon, I saw Leslie at the Nerdy Narrative take part in this readathon like the last 2 years or so, and I always thought it was just such a cool readathon. And this year, I just knew I was feeling a little bit of a slump, so I said, you know what, I'm gonna go for it. This is fun. You get to create your character completely. You can be human, Yoda species. I don't know what else there is because I'm picking Yoda species. So to read that, I'm reading a book of mystery, which is The Diviners by Liba Bray. There's 5 different light side abilities, 5 different dark side abilities, or there's neutral abilities. So neutral is either for light side or dark side, whatever you pick. I went with most of light side abilities. So I'm a Grand Jedi Master after this week. and you just kind of get to create your own character and character bio. And it's just like a fun sci-fi fantasy readathon. There's no points, there's no winning teams, but I just thought, you know what, I'm going to push myself to read hard and to really enjoy the process and to just have fun with this, creating this character. So at the end of this month, so that'll be in 2 weeks from now, I will tell you all that I read, all the reviews, and what character I turned out to be. So tell me, what was your favorite read, March, April, recent read, and what are you looking forward to reading most in May? Happy reading, everyone.